Hello, everyone. A few weeks ago, I received a pair of shoes to test out, and these are the shoes. And I have to admit, they were phenomenal. My name is Dr. Sam Dubé, and I'm passionate about health, wellness, and in particular, human performance. I have a doctorate in modern applied mathematics, which I'm enthusiastic about applying to human situations, nonlinear dynamics, biophysics, biomechanics. I also have a medical degree with a residency in family and sports medicine. I'm a strength and conditioning specialist. I've coached many athletes ranging from amateur ranks all the way up to the elite level and Olympic athletes as well. Myself, I'm a former all-around weightlifting champion, and I particularly enjoy pursuing natural methods and protocols for enhancing human health, wellness, and performance. Back to the shoes. I try on these shoes, and the first thing I noticed is that they're the most comfortable sneakers I've ever worn. One thing I noticed in particular was that the sole was level. Most soles have a drop from heel to toe, and sometimes it's quite considerable. And in the most extreme case, we look at women's high heel shoes. In this case, the sole is relatively flat. But what I noticed the most was the comfort level. So I was actually able to freely move my toes, which I normally can't do in most of my shoes, my sneakers, and my boots. I have particularly difficult feet to fit. So technically, I measure out at 7.5. No, my feet are not that big. 7.5 double E. But due to the volume of my feet, historically, I've only felt comfortable in shoes, sneakers, and boots that are 8.5 to 9 quadruple E width. I can't wear size 7.5 2E shoes. I always have to go quite a bit bigger. And that being said, I've had quite an adventure looking for shoes for the good part of my adult life. Now, these shoes were very different. I put them on. The four-way stretch fabric just seemed to accommodate my foot very easily. The sole was neutral. And walking around, they were so light that I almost stopped noticing wearing I was shoes in the couple of hours that I wore them the first time. While wearing them, what I noticed was that the shoes were exquisitely sensitive to the surfaces that I tread on. So I started walking around my house, most of it's flat surface, and then I went into my home gym and I started experimenting and stepping on the edge of my power rack, doing some free body squats, stepping onto the carpeted areas, stepping onto a rough area that I had designed for some other types of exercise. And the sole of the shoe actually transmitted the sensation of these variable surfaces to my foot. And I found that very quickly, it almost felt like I was receiving sensation in what could be approximated to be bare feet. So I was quite impressed with that. And I wanted to find out more. I have some experience with the predecessor of this technology, but today I'm actually here with the researchers and the developers. And so I would like to introduce Roy Gardner, Dr. Bruce Comstock, and Steve Horvath. Guys, thanks so much for coming out.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Nice to meet you again.
That's right. So I will introduce you each in turn, and I'll make some comments along the way. So Roy, we've known each other now for well over 15 years, and Roy is the lead researcher and scientific product developer, and he's got over 30 years in these fields. And the scientific framework and the related insole products he's developed have been in use since about 1998 by healthcare professionals, athletes ranging from the lower amateur ranks all the way up to the elite level, world class. We have Olympic athletes that have used the insoles as well. And we met, like I said, over 15 years ago, and it was really interesting. And in a nutshell, and I can elaborate later, in a nutshell, I tried on these insoles, and initially there was a drop in my performance. But after about 3 weeks of getting used to them, I noticed a real change in how my body responded to exercise. And I actually broke a barrier that I had been trying to break unsuccessfully for many years. So my raw deadlift went from 585 pounds, which most of you know would be 5 plates on each side, to 605 pounds in a matter of weeks after accommodating to these insoles. And that was at a body weight of about 160 pounds. So I was sold at that point, Roy. I guess I could go on and on about you, Roy, but I'm going to introduce the other guys now, and then we can elaborate a little bit more about your journey in developing the research as well as the technology from the insoles all the way to these new sneaker products. Steve Horvath is an award-winning designer with years of experience in designing various products. He's co-developer of the Stimsole footwear, and he's also co-developer of the BioPods Stimsole insole itself. So I referred to the insole earlier as a predecessor to the sneaker, and he also is a co-developer of the sneaker. So Steve, thanks for coming out. I know we've had some interesting chats, and your workshop is phenomenal. It was like being in a mad scientist lab, but everything was made from plastics, synthetics, fiberglass, you name it, hanging on the walls and the ceiling.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Bruce Comstock is a chiropractor with over 37 years of experience, Bruce, I believe.
That's right.
And what he's done is he's actually clinically tested the Stimsole insoles as well as the footwear. And he himself is an athlete and a high-level cyclist, I believe mountain biker. And he's the author of Weight Training Safely, The Fit Way. And he is also a co-developer of the BioPods Stimsole insoles. So, Bruce, thank you so much for coming out here today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's a pleasure. Now, guys, you can answer in turn, or if you want to talk over each other, I'm not going to stop you. What was the impetus for developing the BioPods insole and footwear technologies? Roy, would you care to address that first?
Yeah, I think I'll start. Well, when I was from when I was really young to my mid-30s, I was an elite athlete, competitive athlete. I had a ton of injuries, severely broke my leg. I had 3 knee surgeries as a result, ultimately caused because of the poor foot function that resulted from being in the cast for so long from the broken leg. And so I just, at a particular point in time, when my problems started to transition from skiing-related issues with my feet to other summer-related sports activities, I was prescribed custom orthotics, and they really didn't work at all for me. In fact, when I had my knee injuries, I was actually using custom orthotics. So I was looking for some way of trying to rehab my foot function, and I saw a documentary on a young man, I guess in his early 30s, who had lost both arms in a farm accident when he was younger. And he had trained his feet so they functioned like his hands, or like our hands, and he was able to do virtually anything that we can do with our hands, he could do with his feet. So I thought, well, if he can do that, then there has to be some way that we can train our feet, because I knew from being in so many casts and splints that when I'm supporting my foot with an orthotic or in a really tight shoe, as everybody was recommended at that time, especially athletes, you had to lace your shoes up really tight, it didn't make sense to me. So I started exploring the science, and I was ultimately, through my research, was able to work with some of the top sports medicine specialists in the world, some of the top sports training specialists in the world, and collectively, over a period of many, many years, we came to a clear understanding of what really should be occurring with optimal gait. And then once that was crystallized, it was really easy to look back and see why so many people were having foot-related problems as a result of their shoes. And then it also crystallized an effective means of rehabilitating that optimal function again. So that was really the impetus for me to get into this. And I think Bruce had sort of similar sports background, but I met him, actually he was the chiropractor at the Gold's Gym where I was working out, doing some of my training. And that's how I got introduced to him. And that was probably like 25 or 30 years ago. And then
Probably over 30.
Yeah, and then Steve, I met in 2012. And again, he's a fellow ex-competitive athlete, or maybe still competitive athlete, depends on how you look at it. We're both still athletes. I'm in my 60s, and I still consider myself to be an athlete. And so we hit it off, and then I guess Steve can talk about his journey. But collectively, I think the impetus for all of us was to find something that worked for us because nothing else had.
Wonderful. Actually, Bruce, can you elaborate a little bit on your history with the development of the Stimsole insoles?
Yeah, sure. When Roy and I met, I'd been in clinic practice for just a few years and was using some of the classic custom orthotics, and they would give people support, but they still needed to come in for recurring treatment for recurring issues, rather. The objective has to be that as a musculoskeletal chiropractor, as I am, we want to get rid of people coming in for recurring problems. We want to figure out why. Why do people have the same thing happening over and over again? And collaborating with Roy through this time and the work behind the scenes, it's become clear that every non-traumatic pain syndrome in the lower limbs is based on feet altering the human gait pattern. And so until we get to the root of why the feet are causing these repetitive strain, many site injuries in the lower limbs, we're only treating the symptoms. Many chiropractors still are not getting far enough down to the root cause. Custom orthotics, they'll claim they fix the feet. They can't. They brace the foot into a position. It doesn't stimulate really good function. So Roy had my attention early on with his intention, trying to create an insole that was beyond the custom orthotic aspect. So using the earlier products, we saw things happen that were phenomenal, but it didn't work for everybody. Categories I've come up with: people with fibromyalgia, their feet are just too sensitive. They couldn't handle the early stimulus that these created. Some people with a rigid foot, they can't get the movement that the insoles try to create. So there are various categories of people that have had trouble with the insoles, but the biggest problem that I've witnessed is the footwear people want to put their foot in with the insole we provide still creates the limiting factor as to how good we can get their gait and rid the underlying problem. It's actually come to the point where people have been able to get pretty close to complete control of a recurring sacroiliac joint problem. They come in, they may not have pain, but I can check the sacroiliac joint, and if it's showing signs of dysfunction, I have to go to the feet and find out what's hindering, and I'll find a mechanical problem. So the shoes are not allowing the complete manifestation of the insole ideals up till just recently. The BioPod insole that you referred to before, the sneakers, that has given us a phenomenal amount of influence over ridding people of the underlying causes of recurring back pain in particular. But I do not think I can get rid of the type of knee syndromes that I do without the corrective insoles I've had access to. But with the current BioPod Stimsoles, I've probably had 0.5% a return. Nobody wants a return. They're either so comfortable they like them even before they realize how much good they're doing. So people are grasping there's something better that we're trying to create.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Bruce. And Steve, you got on board as a designer and a former athlete, combining those passions. Can you elaborate a little bit about your contribution here and your history?
My history, from a design standpoint, I've really specialized in the utilization of unique material families within different industries. So I've brought different composites together in the paddle sports market, different injection mold materials in other markets for clients that want to build products that are not just unique from an aesthetic standpoint, but also very unique from a functionality standpoint. And Roy had asked me to look at this product and see if I could come up with some design inputs that would help him get past the roadblocks that they were currently experiencing. And we have a very similar personal background in regards to our sporting activities and our personal likes and dislikes. So we actually became friends relatively quickly. And one of the things that was that I found very interesting about the development was that it wasn't something that I was really looking for from a personal standpoint, but it became something that I very quickly became aware of how powerful it could be within the market. I've been wearing orthotics on and off since I was 14. I used to run in high school. I transitioned that into weightlifting, into triathlon through university, and then continued cycling and mountain biking and skiing and snowboarding through the remainder of my life up until now. And I've always had issues with shin splints. And I could get a new set of orthotics. They'd go away for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, and then they'd come back. And then I'd get a different set of shoes at somebody's recommendation, and they'd go away for a couple of weeks and they'd come back. There was never anything that provided a cumulative benefit that was quote unquote permanent. And when we were developing the initial insoles, we got to the point where we had some prototypes available. And up until then, I hadn't had an opportunity to actually test what Roy was talking about because we were developing it on the computer. And so we got to the point where we had prototypes developed, and I got a couple of pairs of them. I put them into my different shoes, and as I think with most people's experience with them, they're a little bit uncomfortable for the first week or so until your feet acclimatize to how badly conditioned they were previously. So your feet get stronger, and it takes about 3 weeks, and then you get to the point where you don't notice them. So I got these prototypes in the summer, and I wore them through July, August, and got to the point where I didn't feel them anymore. And I thought, oh, that's kind of neat, no big deal. And that winter, and Roy's heard me tell this story a couple times. That winter, my wife and I, we used to go to Lake Placid quite often to go ski at Whiteface. And we'd go every year, twice a year for a week at a time. And my wife's a really good skier. And I'm a decent snowboarder, but I've always had issues, again, with my shin splints. So we'd go up the mountain, and I'd get halfway down. I'd have to sit down and rub my legs out because they hurt like hell. So I enjoyed it, but there was always this limiting pain component that would never go away. Well, that year, we got to the hill and, signed in and everything and got our passes and hit the lift. And my wife's like, so do you want to start halfway down, doing the, okay, honey, we'll make you feel good while you warm up type thing, right? And I said, no, let's go to the top, right? If we're going to be here, it's a gorgeous day. It just snowed. We had some fresh powder down. I wanted to enjoy as much of it as possible. We got to the top and skied all the way down. No shin pain. Did another run. Skied all the way down. No shin pain. But at this point, my wife's like, are you okay? Usually I'm like off skiing by myself now because you're sitting in the chalet rubbing your legs out, right? Skied the whole day. Never had so many runs in one outing ever. And that night we were sitting at the restaurant, and just out of conversation, we touched on it again, and we were trying to figure out what had changed, what caused this. It was a relatively dramatic change in my comfort level for snowboarding. And the only thing that I had changed was that I'd taken all my orthotics that June, thrown them in the trash, and put the new insoles in all my shoes. And that was the point. I got back from that ski trip, and I called Roy and I said, okay, I'm in on this 100% now, because it's not just a theoretical component. Yeah. You're explaining how it works. Great. Now it's a personal thing. It really, really works. And it fixed, an issue that I had been struggling with as an athlete since my teens. And it was dramatic in the effect that you don't notice the pain anymore because it's not there. Right. Rather than this, oh my God, I put them in and I, ran whatever faster than I ever did before. It wasn't like that. It was like, you'd strengthened a component that you weren't able to strengthen before. And I think most people just don't realize the effectiveness of taking that, your feet and doing the proper conditioning with them. So that's really our history together and kind of my input from that point.
It's so funny, Steve, because your timeline of adapting to the Stimsole insole technology reflects mine. And I'll just take this opportunity to elaborate a little bit and give you the long form version of my encounter with Roy and the Stimsole insole technology. This was actually back in the early 2000s. And at that point, I'd already been wearing orthotics for 20 years. And I had suffered a bad injury of my right foot in an accident where I tore a couple of ligaments and completely flattened out the arch. And I mean completely flattened out, because when I got out of a swimming pool, my footprints looked very different from each other. And I could see a greater surface area on my right foot. So that caused me problems on and off for a couple of years. But eventually, you know, I kind of adapted to it. And I was very interested in strength sport at the time. I had coached numerous high-level power lifters. I was practicing and coaching Olympic weightlifting. I later on got into strongman. So at the time that Roy and I met, I was actually co-hosting the Canadian Strength Athlete Series on TSN as an announcer, as a technical advisor, and I was coaching several of the athletes, so-called behind the scenes. And you know, I was very passionate about human performance, particularly strength gain. And as you know, the principles of strength gain are similar to those of rehab and prehab. We just kind of tone them down a little bit when depending on the context and the purpose. But the ideas are the same. And I was interested in natural methodology, natural methods, natural protocols. And I later on got into all-round lifting as well and competed in that. But what I noticed when I put the Stimsole technology on was, like you said, it was immediate, like, oh boy, I've made a mistake here. I started feeling tired. My feet started getting sore. I had taken the orthotics, and the orthotic on the right foot was actually the one that was the most pronounced, because that was the one with the arch that had collapsed. So they molded my orthotic based on my relaxed foot in the mold. You know how that's all done. And when I took those out and I put in the Stimsoles and I wore them, my feet got fatigued. I remember feeling my calves and my quads more and my hips, and almost all my lifts suffered. And I couldn't stay standing that long. And I just remember Roy telling me, you'll adapt. You probably are wearing them too often. You should be a little bit more discreet. You should be a little bit more forgiving. And I'm like, no, because I was kind of this go guy. And so eventually, after like about 3 weeks, I started to notice that I was walking more easily. I was standing longer. I felt stronger. I had a asymmetry in my pelvis, a very bad one that seemed to cause me less and less grief. And my deadlift started to go up after dropping 150 pounds after trying these things on. And my squat and my front squat also had dropped significantly. But I started to feel better and stronger. And I was making sure my technique was perfect. And eventually I outperformed by 20 pounds, which for someone who'd been lifting for as long as I had was a huge gain. So I was convinced at that point. And I remember my first meeting with Roy. I'd gone to Toronto and we had spoken, and he said, just try on these insoles and let me know what you think. There was no bias. There was no big explanation about what was supposed to happen. Yeah. Roy's usually a man of a few words when you meet him, and you can become fast friends with him, like you said. And I put them on and I did the practical, I did my testing, and I was converted right there. And after that, that's when we really started talking about the research and the technology behind it and what the Stimsole insole was attempting to do, and that was to mimic the bare foot and the reaction of the bare foot to varied stimulation of the environment, which shoes really don't allow. Conventional shoes and footwear don't really allow you to do. Not only do they contain the foot and cushion it and cast it, but they prevent the proper motion, the right motion, right movement, and right technique, which we can talk about later.
Sam, so the experience that you and Steve had, if I can draw the analogy, you just mentioned like the shoes act like a cast. So this is what most people are experiencing out there. They've been taught to keep their shoes really tight because they need the support. They need support motion control in the shoes to really immobilize the foot. So when that happens, you have the same effect of the cast. So if you or anybody else has ever spent a time in the cast, when you come out of it, you're weak. You don't have range of motion. You're not able to. And what's the first thing you want to do? You want to go back in the cast again because it's scary outside of it. You know what I mean? You're afraid you're going to hurt yourself. So the pain and discomfort or that you experienced initially, it's like you're pushing too hard, like you said. You go too much stimulus too quickly, and the body needs a little bit of time to adapt. So it would be like you hadn't done anything at the gym for a really long period of time, and then all of a sudden you go back and you work out really hard, the next couple of days you're going to be sore as heck, right? Because you're getting everything working that hadn't been for a while. So that's part of the process, but it's how powerful it is. Now with the original product, you would go up in these different levels. A lot of athletes would start at the top rather than working the way through, like Sam did. That was common. But with the Stimsole insole technology, it's really gradual. I mean, it works the way that it works. It's designed to be gradual, so you really can't overpower it so much. And unfortunately, Steve was working with some of the prototypes where we had the same sort of mindset where you had to work your way up again with stimulus levels, right? When we learned that wasn't necessary over time. In fact, the brain responds better to a really subtle, varied stimulus. So that was part of our learning curve. But the key thing in all of this, especially for myself, with the earlier products, I was able to rehab quite a bit, but I was still dependent upon the insoles when I took my foot out of the shoe.
Right.
So when we got into the Stimsoles and that technology was much better, it carried through, but I still didn't feel like I was getting the optimal benefit, right?
Right.
So which really is what precipitated, like I always wanted to do the healthiest, perfect shoe in the market that available, because I wanted it for myself. And it's, of all the years that I've been doing this with the insoles, the number one question that I get asked more than anything else is where can I get shoes to use them in? Because when you start with the insoles, it's like your feet wake up and they become aware of what they need. And then you go try finding shoes for it. And it's really, if it's almost virtually impossible to do. Hence, we put all of our energy the last couple of years into developing the shoe technology. And I'm super, super proud of what we've accomplished. And I've been testing the shoes for the last year, probably a year and 4 months now. And they hit every target, if not surpassed every target that we set when we started to do the development. So I'm really excited to get this out and make them available to people that are in need.
And I think that's really important to mention. Bruce brought this up in his own practice. He found that the footwear in which the insoles were contained were the real restrictive factor in determining the benefits of the insoles. And when you asked me to try out the insoles after my very positive experience with some of my athletes, so we got the insoles into their shoes, and they reported the ones that were wearing sneakers that they were flexible sneakers that allowed the dorsiflexion of the hallux, like the big toe. They seem to have the best results. But on the strongman circuit, a lot of the competitors would wear boots, work boots, to protect them from the atlas stones falling on them and such, or various other forms of footwear that were not as conducive to the proper accruing of the benefit of the insole, as Bruce was saying. It was, kind of frustrating to watch because, we got this great insole, but then you're putting it in a shoe, or, you speak to someone who is like determined to wear high heels, and, and it's like, okay, we'll put the 3/4 insole in there and then maybe hope for the best, but really try to discourage you from having that high of a heel, because that will nullify or set you back, and you won't experience the benefit of that technology, of that Stimsole insole technology. So I was kind of frustrated back then with that as well. And so this is really a big development in coming up with a shoe that not only can you put the insole in, but has a technology of its own that causes the whole sole to become sensitive. The whole sole to be sensitive to that subtle, varied stimulus of the environment, and it's even more of a barefoot a model, and I think that's really important to mention. So thank you for letting me.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because from a design standpoint, one of the things that really struck me when we first started looking at this, when Roy said, "Hey, we're going to do a shoe," and I thought, okay, there's got to be, other companies that have looked at a shoe like this. Nobody has actually looked at footwear from a 100% biomechanical only aspect. There's always been some other design driver or intent that inadvertently has caused a deficiency on the shoe side. And that was really striking for me. We spent probably 3 years doing the development on the shoe side, and talking with all these manufacturers and people that had worked in the, you can't do that. That's wrong. Nobody does that. We're like, but this is the way it should be done. And it should have been done from the start. And the end result kind of speaks for itself.
I think in a lot of factories that we went into, we would ask them why they were doing, using like the way they build the last, for example, and the way that they design the shoes. We would ask them why they did it that way. And they looked at, when I asked, they looked at me like I was from outer space, and they go, well, we've been doing it like that for 100 years. Like that's what you do. And I'm going, but what you're doing is creating design aspects in the shoes that's causing problems for people. And they were shocked. They're totally unaware of it. But again, they're really skeptical, and that's the critical thing. There's so much. Over the years, we spent a lot on researching the people that have problems and how satisfied they are with the existing products, and only 1 in 10 orthotic users are satisfied. That to me was shocking. But the bulk of the people that have problems, especially when they get on in years, they'll have tried 10 or 15 different types of products, spending hundreds of dollars on orthotics versus, and the $20 cushioning insoles that they get off the shelf. But they don't believe anybody anymore. And they're really skeptical because they've heard the same message, like, we've got a better material for cushioning. We've got a better way of supporting your foot. But what they don't realize is those two methodologies are absolutely the worst thing that you can do, because it just results in functional atrophy. So I think the key component in all of this is not only to provide the product, but provide the educational information that people need so that they can make informed decisions for themselves. So it's a two-part thing. So I think if they understand like the simple, the scientific concepts, the physiology, I think that leads into understanding why they have problems and why we have the solution.
So let's look at the scientific concepts. Let's look at that research, Roy. So as a strength coach and a strength athlete, and someone interested in natural methodologies for improvement of performance and health and wellness, what intrigued me was your research into the area of what you called optimal gait. So can you relate to us? Because that's really the basis of this, right? That's the basis. Can you relate this concept of optimal gait to foot-related problems and the BioPods footwear, please?
Okay, well, if you look at optimal gait, I think you have to view it through the eyes of the laws of physiology. And those are basic laws that all modern sports training programs are based on. All modern rehab programs are based on the laws of physiology. And quite simply, the body adapts to the way that it's used on a daily basis and the environment that it's used in. So it's constantly adapting. So if you spend all your time sitting on the couch, your body is going to adapt to that. And then your functional capabilities, or what I like to call the functional sweet spot, becomes really narrow. So you're not going to be able to go and run 5 miles or do anything like that because you're going to hurt yourself. So you've got this really small area that you can function in safely without harming yourself. And conversely, you'll take somebody that's more athletic, they're going to have a more expansive and robust functional sweet spot. So they have a greater capability of doing more. So if you look at the 3 laws, the Wolff's law on bone transformation, it describes how bones model or conform to the stresses that are put on them. And then you have Davis's law of soft tissue adaptation, which again describes how soft tissue adapts to the stresses that are placed on them. And then you have the more modern science that's come out in the last several years on neuroplasticity that talks about how the nervous system adapts in exactly the same way to the stresses put on them. So when you look at those systems collectively as the basic physiological function, if you exercise or you participate in activities safely, and this is where the sports training concept comes in. So most athletes know that training with proper technique is paramount to preventing injuries. So optimizing their capability and preventing injuries. Conversely, if they train with improper technique, they might get a really strong body part, but the rest of it is going to be predisposed to injury. So if you look at that, in order to train with proper technique, it needs two things. The brain needs the right stimulus to activate the appropriate muscle activations required for that optimal movement, right? So that the most efficient movement. And then secondly, the limb that's conducting or participating in that movement has to be unfettered. It needs to be capable of going through the full range of motion that's required. So if you understand that and those basic concepts, as soon as you put the foot in a splint or a cast, it's going to result in functional atrophy from a physiological standpoint. So you're not getting the right sensory input from the brain because the soles of the feet aren't providing it, because they lost that intimate ground interface, right, with the ground as far as all the sensitivities are concerned. And then the shoes restricting the natural dynamic raising of the arches and toes that's necessary in order to respond to different activity levels. So a higher activity, the toes and arch have to rise in order for the foot to safely manage those forces. Now, the other critical thing that's important to understand, what's happening is the brain will pick up the sensory input between step to step. And if the sensory input is subtly varied, the brain doesn't know what's going to happen in the next ground contact. So it's going to trigger like the body's natural protective reflex mechanism, so that it triggers muscle activations that will optimally align that structure, the foot, leg, hip, and back, so that when the foot lands, it can safely manage those forces, not only at ground contact, but through the whole step, right? So if the shoe inhibits that, the brain doesn't get the information that it needs, right? It's almost like, if you put you got a dimmer switch for a light. So if you turn the dimmer switch right up, the light bulb, all the electricity gets there, you get the light bulb. Same thing happens with the brain. If you have this cushioning shoe, the dimmer switch is down low and you only get a little bit of information, a little bit of illumination. So think of that illumination as what the brain needs in order to trigger the right neuromuscular activity throughout the leg, right? So if you understand that and you look at, there's a couple of studies that have been done on barefoot populations. They exhibit less than 3% of the pathologies that are seen, or foot-related pathologies that are seen in shod populations, and then habitually shoe-wearing populations like North America. As we speak right now, over 67% of people are experiencing some type of foot-related problem directly attributed to the shoes that they're wearing. That's huge. So our focus was to once we understood that science, we understood, well, we need to create the right stimulus and create the right in-shoe environment. So we're basically starting from scratch and retraining that optimal neuromuscular function throughout not only the foot, but through the feet, legs, hips, and back. So all of those muscles are retrained as part of that process.
Right. And, as human beings, many of us, the majority of us, are in contact with some sort of surface with our feet for a good period of time during the day. And that's our input from the environment. And so, as you were saying, you cannot enact proper technique without the components of this correct or right stimulus and the right movement. And there is this feed-forward mechanism where you're receiving this right stimulus into your nervous system and then being able to anticipate that environment. Oh, isn't that so? You got a fan there, right?
Hi, Chica.
in order to anticipate the next step, so to speak, in this optimal gait. Bruce, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was thinking that in my clinical experience with the insoles, and it kind of emphasizes the distinct differences that's been built into the new stimulus sneakers, is that when I would have someone use the insole and they'd ask about footwear to use, I'd simply tell them, everything you thought you knew about shoes, do the opposite. And so get them flexible, get them at least a half, preferably a full size bigger. But sometimes there has to be that transition because there is that learning curve of muscles learning what to do. So it does show that the shoe that's been created is totally different from everything we've had available to us as well.
The other thing too is that when we redesigned the shoe, we went from the ground up and from the inside out. So we changed everything. Like Steve will talk about, like what we had to do to redesign or redefine how lasts are even made, and we had to change everything, right, in order to get shoes that would work the way nature intended. So if you look at the history of how shoes are made, they're built around a last, right? So most footwear manufacturers would go out and measure like thousands of feet, and then they come up with a norm or an average, and that shape is what they would model their last on, and then every shoe is made around a last. So I think, Steve, you got a last there?
I've got a couple of them. So these are some prototype lasts that we did development work with. And this is another aspect of the development cycle. We actually designed a process where we were prototyping and building our own lasts here in-house with the use of 3D printing and the CAD software that we developed specifically for this project.
So Roy, you already talked a little bit about last making when you spoke to shoe manufacturers. Can you distinguish conventional last manufacture with the last you researched and used for the BioPods Stimsole insole technology? Okay,
so as I mentioned before, the shoe manufacturers will measure thousands of people to define a norm. Well, and as we were talking about, that adaptation process, the foot shape changes in geometry, right? Mm-hmm. As well as function. So the lasts mirror those maladaptive dynamics. And so when you make the shoes based on those lasts, you're making a shoe that's going to create that same unhealthy environment. And like they don't understand that. So what our focus was to design our last on what we call like more of a dynamic principle. Mm. So we're not trying to make a shoe that intimately and really closely fits your foot. We're trying to make a shoe that creates an environment that's going to provide the right environmental influences, if you will, that allows the healthy neuromuscular function to be retrained.
Right, exactly. So you spoke about the last. Now, what other components of the Stimsole technology are unique here? So there's an outsole, there's the insole technology, and there's the stretch material. Can you talk about those other three?
The first thing from the ground up, right? So we'll talk about the ground up. That's probably the best way to look at it. So from the ground up, we realized that we had to create the stimulus. We have the stimulus that was created by the Stimsole technology, which is this here, right? The very soft, springy, the honeycomb pattern. So it produces a very subtle, varied stimulus to the center of the foot. Now, in natural barefoot activities, you're receiving stimulus more so in the heel and the forefoot, right? So we wanted to replicate that, and we wanted to make sure that the shoe allowed for the natural dynamics. And if you look at just from the foot from just a physiology perspective, you have the bones inside, right, rigid inside, and you have soft tissue on the outside. And that soft tissue allows the foot to conform with the ground. You get a larger contact patch, better traction, a smaller lever arm radius because the rotational axis is in the center of the foot. So we wanted to be able to mimic those dynamics as much as possible. So we developed an outsole, this material. It's a very soft EVA material, right? This is typical for most running shoes. It's very soft and springy. And then we have, you can see these pin mechanisms, and which is the midsole. So the midsole, this is thermoplastic urethane, TPU, that's very flexible. It's not soft though; it's dense. So when you put the stress on the little pins that protrude, it's very rigid. But they can move. See this? They can move really, really easily, right? And I've got a little video sequence that I'll show you that explains exactly how it all works. But when you combine these two together, what happens is that the pins are activated as the body weight moves across the insole during gait. So the foam compacts, the pins are activated, that sensory input is sent up to the sole of the foot. And like you say, then you feel everything that's underneath the foot, right?
Everything.
Even if you're standing, as your weight shifts forward to backwards, you're activating the pins all the time rather than just sinking into a big cushion, right?
There was that subtle movement of the pins. I felt it, and just stepping even on a small rock, a tiny pebble in my basement, I felt it. Yeah. I felt it, and I wouldn't have felt it certainly not that intensity on normal footwear, and definitely not in weightlifting shoes. Now, that being said, the other thing that I noticed was the stretch fabric, because having these larger volume feet, you gave me a couple of different shoes, and one was a little bit less stretchy, which you told me later were better for people with a thinner feet, and then wide, thicker feet, muscular feet like mine. They seem to go better with the very stretchy material, and I loved it. I loved it. I was able to move my toes. It almost felt like I wasn't wearing shoes. Can you elaborate a little bit on that stretch?
Well, that's where the inside out comes from. So, for any given foot length and width, people are all different sizes. Like you have guys that are bigger, right? And women that are bigger. And then you can have the same width, the same length, but you got a really skinny foot as far as volume, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of just looking at length and width, we looked at how the shoe needs to fit every foot type, regardless of the volume of that foot. So part of what we've done is we actually come up with two different last sizes that deal with width, right? So we're able to accommodate a wide range of widths. And then we change the degree of stretchiness in the upper. Now, this particular upper, you can probably see the pattern here. This darker pattern here is, if I turn it upside down, it's a four-way stretch. Mm-hmm. And it's like it stretches all over the place. And the reason why we have the stretch coming up underneath this part of the foot is to prevent the person from lacing it too tight. So it allows the arch to move up and down, allows the toes to rise like you talk about. So it deals with everything that we need to do from a functional standpoint. And as you said, like these are super, super light, very comfortable, soft, and flexible. They deform when they hit the ground. So they very much mimic what happens with the soft tissue when you're barefoot as far as ground contact. The other beauty of the pins is when let's say if you're walking on a wetter surface, the pins become a little bit tacky when they get wet. So it adds a little bit of extra grip. And I've been wearing these in the snow, in the rain, and I haven't had any issues at all with slipping. So they've worked exceptionally well in that standpoint. There's other features that we can dive into. We can make them waterproof. We can make them breathable. We're sourcing eco-friendly materials. Like the uppers for this shoe are knitted from a thread that is made from recycled plastic bottles from the waste stream. So we're trying to not only make the footwear that's good for us to wear, people to wear, but good for the environment as well.
Yeah, I think you mentioned each pair or each shoe contains the plastic of 7 recycled bottles?
At least seven, right? That's with this shoe. With some of the other shoes that will be coming out where it has a different type of textile upper, they will be somewhere 14 to 18 plastic bottles per pair.
Wow. Yeah, no, I know that was really important to you and the other developers as well. Now, can we get into, maybe Steve can address this point, testing. What did you guys do for testing?
Testing came after the development stage, which I think was the most laborious, simply because of the way the shoe industry is currently structured. One of the things that quickly became apparent when Roy and I started discussing the initial design intent of the shoe was that we were going to need to maintain fairly tight tolerances across a wide range of product inputs. So not just in volume or sizing or position, but also in the grade of the foam, in how squishy the foam is, the durometer of the foam, in the grade of the pins, how squishy the pins are. Because all of those together, from a functional standpoint, the pins need to be a certain height, and they need to maintain that height across, from your fifth one that's molded to the 5,000th one that's molded, they need to be the same height. And then the foam that it goes into, it needs to compress exactly the same in every shoe. So from the fifth one that's molded to the 5,000th one that's molded, when those pins are actuated, when you put your weight onto it, the foam actually compresses a small amount, and then the pins activate. That amount of compression needs to stay pretty static across all of the models that we're making. Shoe industry doesn't do that. They don't care if the outsole is 1 or 2 millimeters too thick or too thin, because once they slap it together, nobody notices. Right? With this product and the requirements that it was going to need from a functional or a kinetic standpoint, those had to be tossed out the window. So the amount of work that went into finding suppliers that could match the tolerances that we need, and then verifying that they can match those tolerances, and then testing we tested numerous different durometers of pins. We tested numerous different durometers and compositions for foam, for wear, for collapsing over long-term usage, stuff like that. Once we had those parameters in place, then it was a matter of actually getting somebody to be able to make them on a regular basis. Then from a testing standpoint, it was basically get them and use them as much as possible. So I think Roy and yourself have been wearing them quite often. So we've got direct personal usage and feedback on that standpoint, but we've also sent product out for destructive testing. So the uppers get destructive testing in regards to abrasion resistance and tearing. The outsoles get tested for abrasion resistance and tearing. The pins, I think the material for pins are quite hardy, but they went through a bunch of testing as well. So it's quite a complex endeavor given how sloppy the shoe industry currently operates, which was, again, eye-opening. One of my specialties from a design standpoint, I used to do a lot of development work in very high tolerance injection molding. And that has lent itself to quite well to this project in bringing some of those technologies and some of that background into this industry and the suppliers that we're working with in a manner that they haven't seen some of the manufacturing methodology that's been available in other markets. And that's really helped a lot, where we've been able to design new tooling, complete tooling assemblies that they hadn't thought of, to be able to overcome some of the limitations in the materials and the molding that they've got. So it's been quite a bit of work.
Steve, if I could jump where it actually, Sam,
yes,
we talked to factories and mold makers in Europe, in the US, and in Asia that said that what we were trying to do was impossible. And honestly, like multiple factories said what we were trying to do was impossible. And as Steve, so we actually came up with a way of doing it, and we've tested it. The factories have tested it. The mold makers, they're amazed that what we sort of have developed, that they can actually make it.
Yeah, I would think that on average, 1 out of 10 of the factories that we approached were open to looking at working with us to develop the product. 9 out of 10 of those would basically be, I don't think so. This isn't going to work. No thanks.
Or they didn't understand it, right? And they didn't want to change what they're doing, because not only do they have to change the molding techniques, but when they're actually assembling the shoes, they have to do things not in major differently, but there's some subtle changes that they have to do in order to make sure that everything functions properly. So we've been really a stickler on that point, and we just make sure that whoever we're working for, the factories, we go and visit them. Mm-hmm. We make sure that they're treating their employees well. They operate with environmentally sensitive in an environmentally sensitive way, and so we make sure that we have the right people working with us on this project from the ground all the way up.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Roy? Some of the challenges regarding finding appropriate manufacturers and sourcing, as well as can you give us an anecdote maybe to illustrate some of this struggle? Because I know you and I have spoken about this, and I know it was difficult. And
it's just like they when you explain what we want to do, like they're so used to what they're doing, and most factories aren't set up for R&D. Their idea of R&D is coming up with a different design of the same thing, right, and maybe using a different material than they've used before, right? But what we were talking about was really reinventing and getting them to think about things in a different way. So some of them weren't even interested in doing that. Sometimes you have the language and cultural barriers. So you would try to talk with the people that are actually working on the floor to learn more, but they wouldn't say anything without the high boss saying yes or no.
Right.
So there was a lot of challenges, I guess, just on willingness to change from what they were doing, and as Steve mentioned, they willing to even get involved in doing any type of R&D.
I know you and I discussed the potential here, and right now we're looking at these sneakers, and you even mentioned to me that it would be possible to create a BioPods footwear with a composite toe. And I got excited over that one, and still maintain the proper environment for the right stimulus and the right movement.
We with our technology, any shoe that you can think of, any athletic performance shoe, an industrial boot, like a turf shoe, a golf shoe, really easily. With respect to an industrial boot, like a safety boot, we've got technologies that would allow the still full flexibility of the midsole, still have the sole be anti-penetration proof. So like you step on a nail, it wouldn't go through. And then we could create a composite toe in the toe area, which would be better than steel, because when you exceed the steel loads, it pinches people's toes off. And if you use a carbon fiber, it's stronger than steel, lighter than steel, and what it does is it'll shatter and dissipate the load. So it's actually safer. So we can go in that direction as well. But we're starting with the sneaker because we think it'll be most versatile. And then the plan is every 3 months is to come out with a different model for different applications.
Will all the soles be neutral?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And
the thing is, like, again, we're designing from the inside or the ground up and the inside out. So I have a lot of people over the years. Well, why do you make something for high heels? Well, I can't make a healthy shoe, right? So, and I'm only interested in making a shoe that's going to be good for the person to the wear, right? I could probably make a shoe that had higher heels and a bunch of other sort of modern or so-called modern features in it, and it would have been easier, and I could have made more money. But that's not what I believe in, right? So, and I don't think Steve or Bruce would be on board if that's what my mindset was.
Roy, where will the shoes be produced? I'm sure people may be interested in that.
Well, right now, parts of the shoes are produced in Canada. Parts of the shoes are produced in Mexico. And then parts of the packaging and stuff come from the U.S. So it's sort of North American made, if you will.
Right. Okay.
And the immediate R&D is done in Canada, with the prototyping R&D done like Roy was saying, through facilities in Canada and Mexico.
Right, right. Bruce, I know there's a lot going on behind those glasses. Can you comment? You've been rather quiet, but I know that towering intellect of yours is working overtime. Can you comment to some of the points we've discussed here?
Yes, I'd like to. Since my perspective is mainly clinical, that hopefully is useful. Yeah. Over the years, over the years, I've encouraged people, even when using the insole technology, every chance you get, go barefoot, grass, sand, because so far that's the way to be ideal. This a shoe that we're seeing today that's been developed, perhaps I don't have to tell people to do that anymore. In fact, it dawns on me to tell people, stop being barefoot in your house if you're in your house for a long period of time, because the Stimsole, the shoe, is actually imitating outside barefoot. So you're better off inside with the full effect all the time, because there's no stimulus on the typical indoor environment.
Oh, there isn't. It's mostly
just
flat, solid surface.
So the brain just ignores.
How natural? Yeah, how natural is that, right?
Well, I would say though that there's always stimulus, like even on the floor. But is it the right kind of stimulus, right? So is it subtly varied in intensity and location? So if it's constantly the same thing all the time, the brain tunes it out. Just like if you walk into a room after you smell coffee, 5 minutes later you don't notice it anymore. So the same thing. So in order to elicit that protective reflex, that proper pre-ground contact muscle activation, the brain needs to receive subtly varied stimulus. And the more subtle and varied, the more alert it remains, and the better muscle activations that result.
Yeah, I think Bruce brings up a good.
Referring to. Sorry, Steve.
That's okay. I think Bruce brings up a good point in regards to the barefoot component, and it was one of the initial avenues of exploration when we started the design. I went out and bought a bunch of quote unquote barefoot shoes that were trending on the markets and wore them quite extensively, and they had benefits that I could see over regular footwear, but one of the biggest negatives to them is their optimization to try and really be barefoot, to get you as close to the ground. So the soles were like, a millimeter or two thick, and they were over-designed from a stiffness standpoint to try and protect the user. So what you'd end up with is you'd have a sole that was really thin, that got you very close to the ground, but still imparted that disconnect between the base of your foot and the ground around it. So you had this very weird dichotomy where you had a relatively thin shoe that you couldn't really feel the ground with, but was adding a little bit more of a unique feel. And one of the things this product that we've developed does is it gives you all of the ground feel without any of the negative attributes of that super thin sole. So this, as far as I'm concerned, this is the first true barefoot running shoe that's ever been designed, because it's the only one that really lets your foot feel what's underneath it. And that just hasn't been done before. And we're still retaining, 10, 12 millimeters of foam between the user and the ground. We're transmitting that signal through the pins into the person's foot or the user's foot, but we're still imparting the thermal barrier. So you can wear them in the winter because your feet don't freeze on the bottom. You can wear them in puddles because you don't get that cold shock underneath. You can run over surfaces that are really, really ragged because you don't have an overload of that cutting, jagged on the bottom of your feet, but you still have that sensory input. So they're a very, very unique combination of positive attributes that give it it makes a great shoe.
Absolutely. It's like Bruce was mentioning, he's recommending people, if you're walking around barefoot in your house for long periods of time, I mean, that's not a natural surface, right? We evolved with subtle, varied stimulus, whether it be grass or sand or gravel, inclines, declines. Your foot is a miracle of engineering that can respond to these small changes, these subtle differences in the environment. And every step is different. And what these shoes seem to allow us to do is to transmit the different stimuli up through, so that you can anticipate the next step for the optimal gait. So like you were saying, this is really the first true barefoot running shoe, because it has the positives without having those negatives. So I know Bruce is thinking more stuff, Bruce. So please give us some more clinical experience.
Well, I could go on any number of.
Sure. Well, what do you anticipate then for the shoe? Like, what do you see happening in the future? What's your prognosis here?
The bottom line, I've known for a long time that the stimulus that the BioPod in Stimsoles create, I've pondered how would I possibly practice without this availability. And I've almost had a sort of a panic feeling, though. I can't deal with my patients knowing that that's available now. And if it was taken away, I can't deliver what we should be doing for people. In the office, I tell people there's really three things that have to get fixed. What their feet do, how they use their core muscles, and my job with my particular skill set is help the components work correctly. But the feet and the core are the key to getting people musculoskeletally corrected. And so without these insoles, there's no way I could do this to the ideal that I'd like to think this has allowed me to reach. So like I said, any non-injury based pattern of pain in the lower limb, we have to fix the feet. And on a steady basis, not just give it a brief rehab, give it a stimulus so it's resilient on a consistent basis. So the risk of injury is absolutely minimal. When something does happen traumatically to such people, they've been at their optimal, and it's easier to restore somebody to their previous optimal than fighting a pattern on top of an injury that's now occurred. And that's been a really interesting thing for me to learn over the years, was the layers of injuries compounding the compensatory patterns of dysfunctioning feet that everybody who wears shoes does have. So this has really opened the door to full rehab of the kinetic chain of the human body.
The stem cells themselves can be used as almost like a diagnostic tool to help identify pre-existing fibrotic tissue that can easily be treated. And then once the natural elasticity is gained, you're off to the races. So the stem cell footwear will just take that to the next level and really create the proper harmony between the stem cell and the optimal functioning shoe.
Okay. Can we look at how the shoe might benefit certain context situations? I am hesitating to use the word ailment, but for instance, flat feet. I've seen a lot of great athletes with flat feet. Flat feet in themselves are not an issue often, but when you get this pronation, Bruce can talk to this better than I can. I often see the effect on the whole lower body when you get this kind of pronation, and I see this actually quite a bit in strength athletes, and it's a bit disconcerting. How then would the Stimsole insole technology, and in particular with the new development of the sneaker, be beneficial for that case, Bruce?
Well, I would go back to what I said a moment ago, that there are three components to look at. When someone comes in with an overt pain pattern symptom, you want to find out what tissue is responsible and find out, does it need to be rehabilitated? You have to get rid of ever-present damage. And most therapists should be able to do that to a healthy, useful degree. But at the same time, we want to figure out how many other mechanical components are involved in that. And if they've got one component, there's going to be more that are on the verge of manifesting already. So it's not just a symptom that comes in. It's understanding why is it there and how many other places are involved. Somebody comes in with a left knee pain. That might be their right ankle that pronates. They've had an injury to their hip flexor, and everything becomes compounded. You can't clear the slate until you get to the root cause. You'll treat the individual components, but the overview has to be from the feet upward.
Sam, that's a simple way of answering it. If Bruce doesn't mind, I'll condense it. So all of the things he's talking about, like flat feet, that is a byproduct of maladaptive neuromuscular function. So all you need to do is rehabilitate that by creating the right environment. And there's other things that might arise as part of that process, but using the stem soles or putting the shoes on gets people started in that. Like a really good example would be people that complain about sore, tired feet. Mm-hmm. And you commonly hear, well, they need more cushioning because of their feet are sore because of shock. And really, that's not what's happening at all. It's like when they're walking on a harder surface, there's a more immediate transfer of energy. So if the larger muscles in the lower leg and the shin and the calf aren't functioning properly, they're the ones that stabilize the foot and provide it with that stability, provides it with the ability to manage those forces. Mm. So if the shoe has cushioning or support, you don't get the muscle activations to get those muscles working properly. And then the small intrinsic muscles of the foot have to compensate. They easily overwork and fatigue, and that's why people end up with sore, tired feet.
I'm just going to shift gears here for a moment because I know Roy spoke to the environmental conscience involved in creating and manufacturing the BioPods sneaker. Maybe Steve, you could comment a little bit more specifically about the materials used and why, perhaps in the outsole, the insole, and the stretch material. If you can just maybe comment a little bit more, we probably have some viewers that are interested in the specifics of those components.
From a design standpoint, the material inputs Roy's actually had much more input on, because he's really been the one driving the environmental component. But from my side, from a design standpoint, the materials, like I'd alluded to before, really needed to hit those tolerances and the durometers that we were looking for. And that the difference between the pins and the foam to provide the type of feedback that we were looking for was something that was obviously going to be a very big driver in the development of the design of this. The pins needed to be just stiff enough that you could feel them when the foam compressed, but not so stiff that they were overbearing, like you were going to be walking on something really, really rigid. There had to be some compliance in there. So finding that that balance between the two took quite a while, and I think we've still got a couple iterations that we're going to go through before we finalize exactly what we want to do with it. The upper, like Roy was saying, had that unique grid pattern on it, and the grid pattern might actually disappear on the final shoe, because we're looking at possibly doing a knit that's uniform from front to back, but the actual functionality of that grid pattern will remain underneath. So, and the pattern I mean is the little side swoosh that comes up underneath the laces. That does a couple of different things. The two forward edges of the bottom component of that heel segment run all the way forward to just the sides of your forefoot. And what that does is that material doesn't stretch. So it actually provides a stability to the foot on a side-to-side basis. It keeps your entire foot planted within that location that we want the foot to operate in. And then that material, the stiff material, also comes around and then goes up into the lace portion. And there's a segment just below the heels, or just below the ankle on both sides, where the lace component is connected to the heel. That part keeps the foot from moving forward in the shoe. So when you do up your laces, you want the laces to be relatively loose. But one of the issues that I was really concerned about, I do quite a bit of off-road running, and one of the things with off-road running shoes is you can get black toe when your foot moves inside the shoe consistently and it's smacking against the end. That would be less of an issue with these shoes anyway, because you don't have that constricting cap over your toe. But I didn't want the foot to move so much that it was displacing where it was supposed to be in relation to the functionality underneath it, whether that was the collar or the pins. So by incorporating that lacing structure and locking it into the heel in the manner that we did, the foot's still able to move in every aspect that it needs to, but it can't go forward in the shoe, which was the only direction of travel that we wanted to limit.
Right.
With it, well, I shouldn't say that. We wanted to limit side-to-side motion on the footbed, and we wanted to limit forward motion in the toe component. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of aspects to that from a knitting standpoint that are actually quite complex, because most companies that are doing this type of knitting, that looks really cool, let's do the whole thing in that knit. And it all stretches in the same direction. You get that nice feel out of the shoe, but you're not really designing the knit to function both supportively and environmentally to allow the foot to move. They're basically designing from an aesthetic standpoint. So that's one of the other aspects that will take a little bit more time to completely finalize from the development, but I would say probably 98% there in regards to how we want the footwear to feel.
Okay, so speaking of aesthetics, what appearance can we expect for the initial production of the shoe? And what else are you looking at in terms of aesthetics? Color, that sort of thing.
We've done a bunch of test renders, which are basically computer-generated photo images that look very realistic. So we're able to test color aesthetics, color comparisons, different knit patterns, different knit colors. The shoe is going to look very similar to what you've already got. Most of the nuances are going to be in color differentiation and possibly going to a one-piece knit upper body in conjunction with the laces. But like Roy said, a lot of that, we need to draft the functionality first to make sure that we've got a baseline for what we want to work with. And then from there, we'll add the aesthetics, whatever aesthetics are available within that volume.
Understood.
So if we get to the point where this is it, we're done, no more development, now we're just coloring it. We're, like I said, 98, 99% there. Most of the shoes will be pretty much all of them will be really similar to what you're holding, with just aesthetic changes.
Yeah. Sam, from a functionality standpoint, they'll feel like we're still tweaking the amount of stretch. So we'll probably start with 3 different grades. And then what we're hoping in our initial Kickstarter campaign is we get a bunch of data. Mm-hmm. And then from that, we can sort of fine tune what the optimal ranges is, because we'll have more measurements, because nobody's taking the volume measurements that we really need.
Right.
To find that. So the benefit is the Kickstarter campaigns, the people that get their shoes from the Kickstarter campaign, they'll actually have shoes that are custom made to their foot size.
Right.
So then we'll figure out which of those is going to work best for most other people. But one other point. So we talked about, you can see this lighter area here that Steve talked about, going this way here. If we do all 4-way knit, you wouldn't see that, but we would incorporate that technology in between the inner lining and the outer lining. So the functionality would still be there. So we can highlight the technology for like a high-tech looking shoe, right, and then we can hide it for a more conservative looking shoe as well. But they'll help for people. I do a list. They'll help with people with plantar fasciitis, like heel spurs, Morton's neuroma, a diabetic foot, like arthritic foot, knee pain, hip pain, shin splints like Steve had, like just about any type of foot-related problem, this technology will help. But it should be noticed that they may need some, depending how severe and how long they've had the problems, they may need some complementary rehab therapy that somebody like Bruce or another healthcare professional could provide.
Right. There's also a large group of people that just want to feel that they're getting an optimal piece of equipment. Do you know what I mean? Ranging from weekend warriors to people who they just want to know they're doing something good for themselves. And, especially if you contextualize when we're doing this, obviously we're on Zoom. This is during the COVID pandemic. And, I think that there's been kind of a resurgence in people trying to care more for themselves than others, and to lead a higher quality of life, because certain things were taken from us during this time, and you don't really realize what you have until it's gone. And, in making the comeback, I think we've learned as a people to better appreciate the things that we lost, better appreciate the things we took for granted in our lives. And often those are health related things, because when we can't get that proper, we talked about right stimulus and right movement. If we extrapolate to the entire body and the society, if I may be so bold, right stimulus, interacting with people, going out and doing things, and, and right movement, likewise, then you can see that we've been hindered. And I think there's a movement for people to better themselves. And I think this product fits perfectly along in there with that movement for people to seek out high quality, and sometimes really game-changing products for their health and wellness and to support their well-being.
So Sam, there's a couple things. The Stimsole footwear is going to benefit anybody that wants to have an active lifestyle. And one of the things that we really haven't touched much about here is the athletic performance benefit. Because once you have everything functioning at an optimal level, all of that energy, all of their energy then can be applied to that performance. Whereas prior to that, you have a good percentage of their energy going to compensate for the poor mechanical function. And one of the things that, and I've been speaking with athletes and trainers and coaches for years, and one thing that they do not realize is the athlete's street shoes is conditioning maladaptive function every single day, right? So they spend way more time walking around in their street shoes than they do in their athletic shoes. So by the time they go to participate in their whatever sport they're in, they've already, their structure is maladaptive and it's predisposed to injury. So once they exceed that sweet spot, right, it's going to create that propensity for injury. And then they use shoes that are even worse. They're tighter and more restrictive. So it creates a real unhealthy situation, and they don't realize that it's actually taking away from their performance capabilities. And all of that could easily be reversed as well.
That is so true in my experience. I've seen that in many different strength sports. You see the athlete perform in a particular shoe, sometimes a weightlifting shoe or otherwise, and then you see them put on their street shoes, and then you can actually see the dysfunction even more prominently, and you're like, you're bringing that right into your sport. You're bringing that right into your sport, So I think that's a really, really good point, And I mean, ultimately, humans, we move, and we're all athletes, right? It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. It really is. And, we can talk about people with diabetic feet who struggle to mobilize, or people who've had strokes who are rehabbing. All of these people need the right stimulus and the environment for right movement, for proper technique, right? Regardless. So it's really a spectrum of ability and function among us as a species, right? And as individuals as well.
The way that our shoes work is the diabetic ulcers usually form in hot spots. So where there's pressure, specific pressure points, either from rubbing against the shoe. So you have a dynamic foot trying to be immobilized in a rigid structure. So the two fight against each other. With our technology, the shoe is so soft and flexible that it works in harmony with the foot's natural dynamic movement. So it doesn't produce those hot spots.
Right.
So you eliminate the hot spots, you provide the stimulus that increases the blood flow. So it creates in our view, it creates the optimal environment to help get rid of the core causes of diabetic foot problems.
So apply that to plantar fasciitis then, Roy?
Same thing, right? So again, the plantar fasciitis is because of the vertical loads, the arch collapses and they become horizontal. They strain the plantar fascia, creates the micro tears. So, and that's mainly because the muscles in the shin aren't functioning at the right time. So when you retrain them to function, then you have a nice stable arch. The toe has to go up, and that's part of that process. So that's the once you retrain that, you don't get the vertical loads going horizontal and causing the arch to collapse and creating that stress.
I'll resist.
I add a caveat to that.
Please.
Roy, there's no question what Roy's talking about is going to happen. A lot of people, the insoles will tell the foot what to do, but as a clinician, I still have to look after and get rid of the tissues that won't respond to that. I've got a lot of things come through my mind of people that the insoles they go through like layers of reaction. They come in with one symptom, and as they get better, I'll see them a month later, and something else that has slowly activated, and that previously damaged tissue, we've got to get rid of that. So there's almost like a removing of layers of dysfunction.
Yeah. So the shoes, I wasn't trying to imply that the shoes are going to heal anybody per se. They're simply going to create the environment that eliminates the cause, right? So if the person has developed fibrotic tissue, obviously that needs to be addressed, and the shoes aren't going to address that. That's like Bruce and fellow practitioners' forte. But once they do, and you put them back in that healthy environment, they shouldn't have a reoccurrence of the problem.
So, Bruce, you mentioned a concern about how if you didn't have this technology, that you weren't sure how you would be approaching your patients or helping your patients out. But I counter that with there will always be a place for you, because in our modern day society, with our solid flat surfaces and the history of bad footwear, until for dozens of years people have all been wearing these sneakers or walking around barefoot, and we've got a real natural environment around us, then there's always going to be a place for you.
Well, in regard to being a musculoskeletal mechanic, shall we say, it's almost foolish for me to think, well, let's get rid of all the causes, because then I run out of things to fix. And as unlikely as this, I joke to people that if chiropractors want to stay busy, we invest in women's stiletto heels, soft furniture, and handheld electronics.
Yes.
But we can aim higher than that, because there's any number of ways people hurt themselves.
I'll one up you on that. You're not just a musculoskeletal mechanic. You are a neuromusculoskeletal mechanic.
Thank you for the upgrade.
Anytime, my friend, anytime. Steve, what is the primary motivation for you personally to have been involved in the development, the extension of the Stimsole insoles to the BioPods footwear?
I think the functionality improvement that I personally experienced, I knowing a lot of athletes over my lifetime, and the discomfort, I think, is the primary thing that I've heard from so many people. If I do this hurts, or if I run this far, this hurts, or if I, mountain bike, my shins hurt. Being able to be involved in a product that, in some capacity, alleviates a lot of those, and at a cost-benefit ratio that's substantially better than a lot of the stuff that's quote-unquote therapeutic on the market right now, is my primary driver. I think just helping people with their feet and their legs and lower limbs and pain in general.
I remember having some discussions with you in your workshop about the Stimsole insoles and the future direction, and you were so passionate. It just really came out.
That story that I related with the snowboard incident was a big game changer for me. I think I told this to Roy previously, but I added up how many thousands of dollars I've spent on orthotics, and literally have had very little therapeutic, if any, benefit from them, as well as quote unquote pronation control shoes and supination control shoes and motion control shoes and all of this other stuff. And to find something that is so simple in its functionality, yet so alien to so many people because of the way the industry has really been pushed for such a long period of time, is also very refreshing. From a design standpoint, it's exciting because it's something that has a significant amount of validity in how it functions, but it's very unique within the market space. So we're pushing manufacturers in a direction they're not accustomed to. We're pushing designs in a direction that we're not accustomed to. We're sourcing materials and interfacing them with other materials that haven't been used in this industry before. And as a designer, that's exciting. I really enjoy doing that, because the fruition of that is a product that exemplifies a better understanding, I think, of the kinematics involved that we're really looking at. Mm-hmm. From a design standpoint, that I really enjoy that personally, but bringing a product that really helps people to market, and something that's so uniquely simple, from its, like, if you look at it and somebody explains how it works, it's intuitive. there's not really that much to it. You know, you want your foot to be able to do what your foot's supposed to be able to do. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. And most of the stuff that we've had, you know, hoisted on us from the different industries or the different companies that work in this industry, really haven't provided that.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Sam, could I offer one more thing?
Please.
In terms of, again, from the clinical standpoint, it's quite shocking. The number of people come to me with notable symptoms, and they take their shoes off, and sure enough, there's custom orthotics in there.
Yeah.
And so I make it easier to introduce a concept of a new stimulating package. I tell them, if those worked, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And so that often makes it very easy to introduce, we're going to do something different.
I literally took a bag with like, I think 12 pairs of orthotics that were probably about $700-800 each pair. And after the first month of using the prototypes that I had mentioned previously, I took that bag and threw them in the trash. Like it was such an eye-opening concept to look at this stuff and think you spend so much money for something that, granted, provides maybe a month of a removal of a discomfort before it comes back, that it was just stunning to me, the amount of money that people waste in that market segment, and that really has no long-term benefit to it.
But also shows the desperation of the marketplace too.
Roy, would you like to wrap up our podcast?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll say is, like, I understand that people are skeptical, and I don't blame them. I really don't blame them. The products that I've developed that have been on the market, the return rate is almost non-existent, right? Like very, very low, which is why we've always offered an unconditional money-back guarantee. So we stand behind our products. We work hard to create the best product that we absolutely can. And we're here for people. So if they need more information, if we can help in any way, that's what we're here for. And then so the BioPods.com website has it's a wealth of information. People can go there and sort of find something that relates to their particular issue, because there'll be something for there that sort of addresses that. And if there isn't, they can always reach out to us through the website, and we'll get back to them with a personalized answer.
And I know you're very good at getting back to people's inquiries and emails, and so I encourage people to do that. So if no one has anything else to add, I would like to thank our three guests for their participation. My name is Dr. Sam Dubé, and on behalf of Dr. Bruce Comstock, our clinician, our award-winning designer, Steve Horvath, and last but not least, our lead scientific researcher and footwear product developer, Roy Gardner, I want to thank you very much for listening and watching our BioPods Stimsole Footwear podcast. So thank you very much, and we encourage you to look for more information and to contact us. And we have a great product and would love for you to partake. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Good time, Sam.